Hello, we're back, and in this set of video lectures, we're going to talk about coding diseases of the digestive system. Okay, so these codes all begin with K. They run from K00 through K95 code category. And these include diseases of the oral cavity, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the appendix, any hernias, any non-infective enteritis and colitis, other diseases of the intestines, diseases of the peritoneum, the retroperitoneum, the liver, the hepatobiliary tract, and any other digestive system disorder running through K90 through K95. Couple things to look at when you're assigning these codes. Number one, the term hemorrhage is used when referring to ulcers. Bleeding is talking about gastritis, duodenitis, diverticulosis, and diverticulitis. There's certain combination codes for hernias in the digestive system that include whether a hernia is present with gangrene or obstruction and is unilateral or bilateral. For this chapter, you may want to review figure 14.1 in your text that gives you a diagram of the gastrointestinal tract. There are no digestive system guidelines published for 2024, but as we've seen with other chapters in the ICD-10-CM codebook, just because there are no guidelines doesn't mean that we don't have to pay attention to the tabular. You'll see a lot of things that have additional code instructions throughout, and things we want to make sure we capture include the following: alcohol abuse or dependence, exposure or use of tobacco, infectious organisms, and sometimes we'll have a GI disease that's caused by something else, so we code the underlying disease. And again, working our way down from the oral cavity, we have the codes that run in code category K00 through K14. And this includes dental caries, abrasions, erosions, what have you, periodontal disease, all those fun things we talk about with oral surgeons and dentists. With ulcers, they can either be gastric, duodenal, peptic, or gastrojejunal. And these include both acute or chronic conditions. Things we want to look for when we're assigning the codes include the presence or absence of hemorrhage or perforation. When we use the term gastritis, of course, we're talking about inflammation of the stomach lining. Duodenitis is inflammation of the duodenum. And codes will identify the specific type of gastritis and duodenitis, along with their severity and etiology, such as alcoholic or chronic atrophic gastritis. Appendicitis is a common condition many of us are familiar with, and basically it's inflammation. So when we get that inflammation of the appendix and it gets swollen and it perforates, we can have gangrene, peritonitis, and resulting in death. So the codes on this condition will identify whether appendicitis is present with or without peritonitis, or with or without abscess, or with or without perforation or gangrene. A hernia is a protrusion of a loop or a knuckle that goes through an abdominal wall, and these can be several types. So we have to keep reading when we see the main term hernia. This includes such things as an inguinal hernia, femoral hernia, hiatal hernia, and so on. When we see the term reducible hernia, that means the physician can manipulate the displaced structure back into position. We're talking about an irreducible or incarcerated hernia. We're talking about a hernia that is not able to be returned back to its original position by manipulation, and it may or may not be strangulated. The term strangulated means that it's incarcerated to the point where it restricts the blood supply to the herniated tissue, and this can cause gangrene, and it is, of course, a medical emergency. Crohn's disease is also known as regional enteritis, coded to code category K50. And this is a chronic inflammation, typically most commonly in the ileum, but can be anywhere in the GI tract from the mouth to the anus. Its cause is unknown. The code category for this is K50. And then the fourth character talks about the site, whether it's the colon, ileum, what have you. Fifth character talks about whether there's a complication. And the sixth character on the code would classify the complication, right? So K50 is an invalid code. It's just the code category. I'm going to make sure that we capture the entire code. K52 is similar to K50 with Crohn's disease, but it's basically an inflammation of the mucous membrane of the lower intestines. And this can be caused by autoimmune, toxins, allergens, all different types of things, with the case of gastroenteritis. With colitis, we're talking about inflammation specifically within the colon. So these things is salmonella, viral, what have you. When we talk about colitis, we're talking about inflammation of the colon. Gastroenteritis, we're talking about the inflammation of the stomach and the intestines. Note that there's a code first code directive in K52 to identify the toxic agent if known. With K65 through 68, these are diseases of the peritoneum and the retroperitoneum. And this can result in peritonitis, the inflammation. And with these codes under K65, there's a note to say code the additional microorganism responsible. Let's take a quick look at that. And again, here we have it, K65, note our friend the fourth, which means we need a fourth character, and we need to use an additional code of B95 to 97 to identify the infectious agent. And then we have generalized, abscess, and so on, as you can see here in your book. Here's something that I referenced in the video announcement, and this is talking about the importance of being clear on whether it's cholelithiasis, cholecystitis, or choledocholithiasis. When we talk about cholelithiasis, we're talking about calculi or stones in the gallbladder. Choledocholithiasis is the presence of calculi or stones in the common bile duct, and cholecystitis is inflammation of the gallbladder. You can have all three, you can have two of three, but either way, they're all different codes that fall in the code categories of K80 through K81. K80 is stones in the gallbladder or in the bile duct or in both locations. And the way we would find this code is to look at the main term, cholecystitis, and connecting term with calculus, calculus being the stones in the gallbladder, and it directs the coder to C calculus gallbladder. Let's take a look at what that looks like in the alphabetic index. There we go, the main term, K81.9. Then we have to look carefully with the subterms for width, calculus, and then it'll tell us to see, in other words, go directly to the main term calculus bile duct with cholecystitis. And again, you'll see a lot of this throughout this chapter with the K81, K80 codes, the cholecystitis without stones. And again, once we go to the tabular, it will direct us to use the additional code if applicable, excuse me, for associated gangrene of the gallbladder or perforation of the gallbladder. Moving on to K92, gastrointestinal hemorrhage, we can have hematemesis, which is vomiting blood, the K92, the melena, the dark black stools, or any other unspecified GI hemorrhage, K92.2. If we have occult blood or a small blood in the stool from the GI tract, that's coded as a symptom code K19.5. Note that there's some exclude one codes under K92.2. It's not appropriate when one of the other conditions under excludes one is present. Let's take a look at that code very quickly. And again, this is what we're talking about. Note here, GI hemorrhage, unspecified, K92.2. If you think about it, if it's unspecified, you really can't have it specified as acute. So hopefully that makes sense. But the real key here is to carefully read the tabular. And that's all I have for you. We'll see you online. Bye now.